Good evening, everybody. If you can hear me and see me, my name is Uday Bhaskar. Allow me to welcome all of you on behalf of the Society for Policy Studies and Konark Publishers to this book launch come book discussion. I can see some of you on my screen, but not all of you. So the first Adam request is that because of the technology and the fact that I cannot see all of you, if any of you have any technical issue about the image or the audio as we go along, please send it in the form of a question or as a request to the admin. They will be monitoring it and they will pass it on to the chair for the evening. So this is the minor administrative detail. So on that note, if everybody is on board, again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We have this book discussion, which you would have seen in the invitation. I can't show you the book just now because it's not been formally released, but I have it with me, The Other Shangri-La. Now, people of my generation, the moment you use the word Shangri-La, we think of James Hilton and various other associations come to mind. But we are delighted that we are able to enable on this platform, SPS Konark, the launch and the discussion of this book, for which we have a very eminent lead speaker for the evening, Ambassador Shyamsaran, who will be introduced to you by our chair. And our chair for this evening, allow me to welcome and introduce Ambassador Venu Rajamony. Ambassador Rajamony currently is the Indian ambassador in the Netherlands. And not only is he a very distinguished diplomat of the Indian Foreign Service, but he's also a very dear personal friend for us at the Society for Policy Studies, and also very, very, I would say, a well-wisher of Konark. And he very kindly agreed to chair, steer, moderate our discussion this evening. So I'll request Venu, Ambassador Rajamony, if I may, to both introduce the author and our lead speaker for the evening, Ambassador Shyamsaran, and the subject itself. I'll take a couple of minutes to introduce Ambassador Rajamony, Venu to friends, whom I've had the privilege of knowing for many years. I recall my early years at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, IDSA, when we were in Sapru House. And we used to have a fairly, I would say, robust, extended interaction with the Ministry of External Affairs. And at the time when I first met Venu, he was a young diplomat in the headquarters, if I remember right, in the DISA division. That is international security, looking after nuclear disarmament and related issues. And he also was, for me, a resident China expert. He was somebody who had already served in Beijing. And I was trying to understand the entity of China. And over the years, I've benefited considerably from Venu's insights into China and related issues. And I often say, in a very earnest manner, that Venu is one of those lesser known experts on China. We have a lot of them in India now, by the way. But his expertise and his modesty, I would say, are inversely proportional. But thanks, Venu, for being with us this evening. And amongst all the other accomplishments that are due to him, on his CV formally and elsewhere, Venu has also been a very effective diplomat for India that I can recall in the UAE. I won't go into detail, but his contribution when he was there as the CG was very, very distinctive. And along with all the other things that he's done, Ambassador Rajamony has been able to author 4 books. Now, as somebody who's in awe of people who sit down and get up after 1 week and say, my book is over, here is the manuscript. For the record, the 4 books, and I'm going, chronologically backwards, if I may. His most recent book is India and the Netherlands, Past, Present, and Future. It was released last year in 2019 by the King of Netherlands. Earlier in the same year, 2018-19, Venu had done a very useful, I would say, policy relevant book, which was called What We Can Learn from the Dutch. This was the rebuilding of Kerala post the 2018 floods. By the way, amongst other things, let me add that Venu is from Trivandrum, the university, the King's College there in Trivandrum, and a very, I would say, distinguished alumni of that particular institution. And his third book, which I can recall, is when he used his experience in the UAE. And the book is entitled India and the UAE in celebration of a legendary friendship, which incidentally is available both in Arabic and Malayalam, apart from English. And where I first saw the depth that Venu Rajamony can bring to a subject was in the early 2000s. I think this is when when Prime Minister Vajpayee was at the helm of affairs. We were in this post-Kargil, post-9/11 environment. And while he was a fellow at the CSIS in Washington, USA, Venu contributed a very important monograph, which at one level I would say was prescient. He wrote about India, China, and the United States as a kind of emerging triangle in terms of the relationship. And it was about soft balance of power in the making. And as I said, for somebody who's tracking IR and various other related trends, I think now in retrospect, it was a very, very important contribution for its time. But on that note, let me stop. As I said, I just thought I would take the liberty of introducing Ambassador Venu Rajamony. And now over to him. We have a fairly, I would say, friendly time plot, but I'll leave it to Venu. And we also have provision for people to be able to participate in a QA manner, but I'll leave that to you, Venu. Ambassador Rajamony, all yours.
Thank you, Uday. I hope all of you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this very sweet and very elaborate introduction, Uday. I'm grateful to you and to the society, as well as KPR Nair, the founder and managing director of Konark, for having invited me and given me this honor of moderating a panel in which my very distinguished senior colleague, Mr. Shyamsaran, would be speaking. And the topic is this wonderful book called The Other Shangri-La. My task here is to introduce the book and the author, as well as Ambassador Shyamsaran, and I will try and proceed straight away into that task. The book has a subtitle, which is Journeys Through the Sino-Tibetan Frontier in Sichuan. And essentially, it is a narrative of the travels of the author and his wife, who incidentally is from China, but now a Singapore citizen, how the two of them travel through the Tibetan areas of Western Sichuan, the adventures they have, the hardships they face, including thousands and thousands of Chinese tourists who cannot be missed in any part of the world today, what they see, and the people, more than anything else, the people that they encounter, the conversations that they have, and how sort of the philosophical questions, which I think come to the author's mind in many ways when he sees what he sees and when he feels what he feels as he does these travels. I will not go too much into the details of the book because Ambassador Shyamsaran is also going to speak about the same. Let me just say that I found it a riveting read. Once you start, it is very difficult to put it down. It is an easy read. It is written in simple but eloquent prose. And there is wonderful humor, which laces the book throughout from beginning to end, which makes it really a very enjoyable read. As you go through each chapter, you're anxious to know what comes next. And when you suddenly bump into the epilogue and you realize that the journey is over, you truly feel sad. And the instinctive reaction is, I wish I could take the next flight and fly into Chandu and go visit all these places, which I think is the reaction the author wants to produce in readers. And if not as at least second compensation, travel to Singapore and visit the author and his fascinating wife, whom he describes in the book and who is a very important character. Shivaji Das was born in Assam. He's an author, a traveler, and a photographer. May I add, by passion. Otherwise, I think for his living and to fund all his travels, he works as Managing Director, Asia Pacific, for a consulting firm, Frost and Sullivan. He's one of those deadly combinations in terms of educational institutions, an IIT and an IIM. He has written 3 travel books previously, one on Nepal, one on Indonesia, and the other about miscellaneous writings about various places. He has played a major role in organizing different festivals, one of them with having migrants as a major theme. And let me say that he has won a large number of awards for his writings, which include not just books, but also in leading magazines and newspapers of the world. The main commentator on the book today is Ambassador Shyamsaran, who needs little introduction to audiences like this, but still let me fulfill my duty. He is one of the most respected commentators on India's foreign policy, on all matters of policy relating to India, as well as international affairs. I would say a very respected commentator, not just in India, but across the world. He has a fan following across the world. He was previously Foreign Secretary. He was Special Envoy of the Prime Minister. He served as Ambassador to Nepal, to Myanmar, to Indonesia, and Mauritius. Ambassador Shyamsaran speaks fluent Chinese, has lived and worked in China for long years, has worked on China for long years. There would be few people who match his understanding of China and developments in China, but equally a few people who have his empathy for the people, the culture, and the civilization of China, who sees China-India relations not purely from a political lens, but from a human perspective. Great pleasure to be introducing you to this audience, sir.
Thank you.
Let me just add one comment as I conclude my initial remarks and give the floor to Ambassador Shyamsaran. When I started reading the book, one of the first thoughts which occurred to me was how many people from India have really written about China, and how many people from China have written about India. And truly, the Chinese record goes so far, far back. We have to start with Faxian and Xuanzang, people we in India know as Faxian and Xuanzang, who were perhaps the first travel writers from China who traveled around India and wrote about life and people in India, though colored very strongly by a Buddhist perspective. And there have been a large number of Chinese journalists, retired ambassadors, who have written books about China, about India in China and in Chinese. But there have been very few people from India who have written about China and its people with an Indian sensibility. We have, I think, K.P.S. Menon Senior comes to mind immediately as part of his memoirs. Vikram Seth wrote a wonderful book, Heaven's Lake, which also won many awards. And there are many young writers, Pallavi Iyer, Mishi Saran, etc., who have written books recently. There are a large number of books which have come out by people who have done the Kailas Mansarovar Yatra. I don't know how to judge the quality of most of those books. But still, what I would say is that there are too few books written, and we really need more and more Indians to travel in China like Shivaji and his wife did. And we need people to travel to these unknown corners, to the nooks and crannies of China, and to bring the unknown China. By now, I think most people in India have some understanding of Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou or Shenzhen or even Xi'an. But there is still so much of China that we in India don't know, that we need to understand, that we need to assimilate. And the sheer diversity of China in many ways, while it is a monoculture in some ways, it is also an extraordinarily diverse country which is brought out in this book. Shivaji not only brings an Indian perspective, he brings, by virtue of his wife, this fascinating India-China perspective. I think it'll be wonderful to know if both of them travel in India what that experience will be and how he will see India through his wife's eyes. So I conclude congratulating Shivaji once again. Wonderful book. Please keep the books flowing, keep writing. We would love to see more writing on China from you. We would love to see more writing on India from you. And let us all collectively work to enhance the understanding between India and China in whatever manner we can. Thank you very much, Ambassador Shyamsaran, sir. The floor is open to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Venu. Thank you for your very generous introduction. May I also like you congratulate SPS and Konark Publishing House for organizing this event to really celebrate a very fine travelogue by Shivaji Das on his travels to some of the remote corners of China. Shivaji will be speaking about his book, so I will keep my comments very limited. Just share with you, my impressions of reading the book. As Venu said, I too sort of read the book cover to cover in virtually one go because it was so readable. And I think there are 2 or 3 points I would like to make. One is that it is a travelogue which reflects really the need for us to get away from the kind of stereotype images that we have of other countries and other peoples. And this is, I think, a big problem in India because we have certain, very simplistic images of what China is all about and what Chinese people are like. I think even the Chinese try to suggest a degree of cultural homogeneity, which the country actually does not have. Many of us who have been in China become very quickly aware of the immense plurality which also exists in China. Under the surface, you realize that it is a very, very diverse country. Even if there is a unifying factor of the script, the Chinese script. If you are traveling from, say, Guangzhou to Shanghai to Beijing, you will find that, the language is spoken in very, very different ways. I still remember when I used to be learning Mandarin, that, spending time in, say, Hong Kong or in Guangzhou, the only way I could communicate was actually by writing, what I wanted to put across, because my interlocutors could not understand the Mandarin that I was speaking, nor could I understand the Cantonese that they were speaking. So the first point I would like to make is that Shivaji Das's book, very nicely brings out that diversity of China. The eccentricities of various individuals that, they came across. Very human portraits, in a sense, of whether they are Han Chinese or whether they are Tibetans or they are other nationalities of China. I think that dimension is something which is perhaps one of the most valuable in the book, breaking that stereotype. The second point I would like to make about his book is that, I think we have forgotten that the messages that we want to give our readers are perhaps far easier to give if this is packaged in a humorous kind of a manner. And I think the use of humor in this book, right from the beginning to the end, is perhaps one of the strongest qualities of this book. That it really is able to put across what I think are important messages about China, important messages about, relations amongst China's plural, society, messages about how China looks at the world and how the world perhaps wrongly looks at China. Many of these messages, come across perhaps much more strongly, much more effectively, because they are actually presented in this very nice, flowing, humorous style. And for that, I would like to also commend Shivaji Das, because it's a writing style which I'm afraid is rare to find, perhaps these days. So that's the second point I would like to make. The third point is that we become aware of the fact that the Tibet that we are talking about actually historically has been a far larger entity than perhaps many of us realize. Even today, Tibet seems to a massive, chunk of China. But actually, it was an even bigger chunk in the past. And so many of the borderlands that we are talking about, whether they are in Sichuan or Yunnan, Ningxia, these are all, in fact, part of that larger Tibetan homeland that over a period of time has become truncated. So I think we begin to appreciate how much this very unique culture of the Tibetan people, how much in fact it runs through a very large part of what is now China. And I think one of the, again, important messages that comes across is that despite those tensions amongst the Han Chinese and the Tibetans, that does emerge from the narrative. There is also an interesting dimension of how many of the Han Chinese are becoming interested in Tibetan culture, are becoming fascinated by some of the eccentricities which they think of Chinese culture. Most importantly, because there has been so much of focus on the improvement of material living standards, of getting prosperous, which are all very legitimate pursuits for a country which, like India, has been a poor country for a long time. So it is not at all unusual that there should be not only a tremendous focus on improvement of living standards, but also to enjoy it. And those hordes of Chinese tourists who are coming to these absolutely, picturesque borderlands between Tibet and Sichuan. On the one hand, they are using their newfound prosperity to explore this great country and all the wonders that it has to offer. But it also are people who, despite, as I said, the kind of political homogeneity, the cultural homogeneity which is sought to be, imposed, are beginning to actually be interested in some of the spiritual dimensions of Tibetan culture, of being able to appreciate that, unlike what they have been in a sense locked into, here are people who are perhaps, have a different way of thinking, who think about life somewhat differently. And I think that is the hopeful note for the future that Shivaji Das does conclude his fine book on. That is there some kind of a meeting that is possible? Of course, the history of Chinese and Tibetan, interaction, their encounters in the past, is also a very rich history. And is this something that will, when we are looking at the future, is this something that will emerge? Lastly, I would like to also draw attention to something which is very close to my heart, which is, the whole ecology issue, the issue of climate change, where I believe the areas that have been visited by Shivaji Das, I do believe the important aspects that I was very much, concerned about is that, there is the whole issue of ecological degradation, of the influence of climate change. And while the areas that Shivaji visited are some of the most breathtakingly beautiful landscapes anywhere in the world, in fact, very well known now as a result of also some tourism promotion by China itself. This is also a very fragile ecology, which can be degraded very easily. And I think Shivaji Das has done very well to draw attention to that aspect. As these areas which have once been remote, which have been preserved in a sense because of their remoteness, I think that as a result of their opening up and the economic and commercial aspect, becoming more ascendant, I do hope that they do not lose their breathtakingly beautiful sort of quality as we go along. So let me stop here once again. Thank you, Shivaji, for bringing such a lovely book to our attention. And somebody like me who has also served in Indonesia and Nepal, where I believe you have written some books about these two countries as well. I'm very much looking forward to reading those travelogues as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir, for that concise summary of the important points that emerged from the book. The book, I think, has to be truly read to be enjoyed. But now I would request Shivaji to speak to us about both the book and what inspired him to choose this particular area of China to write about, and the whole process of writing such a book, because I found that the book has lots of interesting nuggets regarding Tibetan Buddhism, regarding the history of that region, the Chinese-Tibetan contacts. So how did you go about the process of writing the book? What kind of homework did you have to do previously? What kind of homework did you do after? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Rajamony, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you very much, Ambassador Saran, for those wonderful comments coming from someone like you. It's indeed very precious for me. We were just having a chat before this, and I was telling Ambassador Saran that I can read about 250 Chinese characters. And I was hoping to be an average literate Chinese by reaching the mark of 800 characters. And Ambassador Saran told me in a very humble way that at one point of time, he could read 5,000 Chinese characters. So coming from a person like you, it's very precious for me. Thank you to SPS, Mr. Bhaskar, Mr. Basu, for organizing this whole session. And also thanks to my publishers, Mr. Nair from Konark, Gesar, and the whole team, which has worked very hard in bringing this out into the whole world. So thanks a lot. I'd also like to thank some key people who have made this book possible. I would like to thank, first of all, I think my wife, Miss Miao Miao Yu, who is native Chinese. I mean, her parents are still in China, but she's a Singaporean. She's also a writer. She's a poet and short story writer herself, more awarded than I am. And she was, as Ambassador Saran has mentioned in the review, she was the interlocutor, she was the disciplinarian, and also the planner in many cases because of the language and cultural issues involved in organizing such a trip. And beyond that, just the company that she gave me makes me want to go again and again for any other trip along with her. But most importantly, I would also like to thank all the people I met along the way during this journey, whether it would be the public van drivers, whether it would be the people who hosted us in a Nomads camp, whether it would be just even the policemen who told us small nuggets of local history and culture. Even policemen actually helped us quite a lot. So I would like to thank all of them whose insights, whose kindness, and whose generosity made all these stories possible for me to get and then finally bring it out as a book. Now, a little bit about why this trip and why, what was the motivation writing about this trip, these two things. First of all, as a travel writer, kind of a part-time travel writer, if I can call myself, what interests me are places which have this diversity of characters, complexity of history, complexity of human relationships. And this was a part of China or Tibet, as you may want to call it, which had all these elements. And as a bonus, it is probably one of the most beautiful parts of the world. Very few people know it outside of China. The Yading Valley, which is one of the claimants to the title of being Shangri-La. This is perhaps one of the most beautiful places in the world that I have seen. And I would anyway just visit that place once again if the opportunity comes around. Yeah. So that was one of the motivation. But when it comes to writing about this place, I had a bit of, I would say, a kind of a strange ambition to kind of replicate the cultural interactions which some of you alluded to earlier, the strong history between these three great civilizations, whether it's Tibetan, whether it's Chinese or Indian, in the last 2000 or more than that over years. So you had people like Kumarajiva, who was from Kashmir and played a very important role in moving Buddhism to China. Even Padmasambhav, one of the most important characters in Tibetan Buddhism, he actually, there is a hypothesis that he died very close to where I was born and where I was raised. He died in a place called Hajo, which has the confluence of these three religions in Assam. And so there were these people who I was familiar with, and there was the opposite direction of journey as well, which is Hiven Sang, and the loosely based character in the great Chinese classic, The Journey to the West, where Tripitaka comes to India to get these scriptures, the Buddhist scriptures, and along the way faces many challenges together with his acolyte Monkey King. So I was influenced by all these curious characters who have been the bridge in the past between these three great civilizations. And I sort of thought that maybe I could be a kind of a bridge once again between that. So it was a very bold ambition. I don't think I have come anywhere closer to these great people who have in the antiquity been able to do that. But I thought I would be at least one of those minor scholars who can shed some light. But the challenge with the minor scholars, and there have been many minor Indian scholars who have gone to Tibet, to China to spread Buddhist scriptures and translate them, is that they were always accompanied by translators or interpreters who could speak Tibetan or who could speak Chinese and could speak Sanskrit, Pali, or whatever Indian language the Indian scholar would speak. But many times they would abandon that Indian scholar, and many of these minor Indian scholars sort of ended up living as nomads in those Tibetan Qinghai Plateau, all those valleys. So I was a bit scared of that as well, that what happens, but I had a much more reliable interpreter in form of Meow Meow, or my wife in that case. So this were the inspiration behind writing about these places which I visited. The other important factor is that while this part has this very strong Tibetan influence, it is actually not under the Tibetan province as it is marked out in China. It is therefore, it was at that point of time easier for us to travel as independent travelers. If you want to go to Tibet, you had to be part of a tour group as per the regulations. But this part of the Tibetan Qinghai Plateau, it was still possible to travel as independent travelers. Looking back, I'm also in a way happy. In a way, it's unfortunate as well that I undertook that journey, because many of these places which I have visited have since been barred for foreigners to go at this point of time. Yeah? So some of the places such as the monastery at Larung, which I have talked about quite extensively, one of the largest monasteries in the world and perhaps the highest slum in the world, it is no longer possible for foreigners to visit that part of the world. Similar things have happened time and time again to other parts as well, like Litang, Serta, which have seen self-immolations in protest to the Tibetan government's rule, to the Chinese government's rule over there. And from time to time, the government has banned access for foreigners to these parts of the world. So in a way, I feel a bit fortunate, even though it's an unfortunate situation, that I have been able to visit these places and also been able to write about them, that in case it's a more open environment at some point of time, many more people can travel to these fascinating parts of the world. So with that, let me share a few pictures which will get the viewers a little sense of the place that I visited together with my wife and what the book sort of covers. So I believe you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So very quickly, as I was mentioning, this is not exactly Tibet in terms of the province, but this is the very eastern part of the Tibetan Qinghai Plateau. So in the province of Sichuan, part of it is the plains of mainland China, and then the rest are these highlands, which have more than 7,000 meter high mountains. And then you have these very isolated settlements which live in the valleys in between these high peaks and these highlands and the rivers which pass through this area. So this is roughly the route we followed. We went to the big town of Chengdu and then moved along by public transport to Kangding, Tagong, Litang, Daocheng, Yading, and then came back all the way to Chengdu and then went up all the way to Serta, then came back to Bamei and Danba. I'll be talking very briefly about some of these places, but the ones which I'll not talk about in detail. Kangding is a very interesting place. All over China, it's famous, and it's famous for a love song. Yeah. For those of you who are curious, I would recommend you to buy the book to know the story behind this famous Kangding love song. But there are also other famous places along the way. They are important places for Tibetan Buddhism. They're important pilgrimage areas. And I wish I could actually spend more time than the 1 month that we spent over there, so that we could cover the real diversity of this place and the real richness of both the nature as well as the cultures which are residing there. Naturally, there are a lot of conflicts as well, which have happened because of the socio-economic changes which has happened over the last few years. The book kind of tries to portray all these based on what I've heard and what I have understood. But let me show you some of the pictures to give you a sense of how beautiful this area is. And this is at the heart of this Shangri-La. Yeah? So as many of you may know, there is no real Shangri-La perhaps, or there are too many Shangri-Las if you include the hotel chain as well. Yeah? So this is one of the places which claims to be the Shangri-La, which was mentioned in James Sultan's novel, which is this place of utopia in some sense. And as you can see, it is one of the most beautiful places in the world. These 3 peaks in that valley, they have fantastic autumn colors. Even during winters, it's very beautiful. And also the valleys and the highlands. This is Mount Abba near the Tagong Highlands, which I thought was one of the most spectacular mountains, even if it's not a very high mountain, only about 5,500, but just its prominence is so amazing. This is what really kept us all the time energized, even though we were always above 4,000 meters during our journey. But it's also home to the most dangerous roads. The Sichuan-Tibetan highway is famous for the number of accidents which happen. And along the way, we saw many of these graveyards of trucks and vans which had kind of ended their lifetime along this place. And we had many such harrowing trips. All our fellow passengers will be reading the Avalokiteshvara mantras as they were going. They will be hoping that they actually survive this journey. And there's a legend among drivers that unless you have taken this route, this Sichuan-Tibet highway, drivers do not become men, they stay as boys. So that's how well-known this highway is in all of this region. This is the place in Kangding where the lyrics for the Kangding love song has been etched into a concrete book. And still today, it's playing all the time in the town square. And people are dancing around it even today, 50 years after the song was first released. But more importantly in this whole trip, it was not just the beauty, but the characters we met, and not just their generosity, their kindness towards us, but also their way or attitude towards life and their living conditions, which was very unique, as well as the cultural and historical context. Yeah. So we were fortunate enough to be welcomed into the tent of Nomads, and we spent a few days with them, and we got to know a lot about their lifestyle, but also the various challenges that they have faced and the kind of transition they have gone through in the last 40 years of tremendous economic growth, which have touched the nomads, at the same time hasn't touched them in some ways. Just as an example, the life expectancy among nomads remain in the mid-40s, which is almost half of not half, almost nearer to half of that, the average in China. So these are some of the conditions under which they live with. But especially in the last 5 years, their income levels have gone up a lot because of the popularity of this famous caterpillar mushroom, which is a traditional Chinese medicine ingredient, which has really led to increasing income for many of these families, and some of them have settled down. You can see some pictures of how they live with the nomads. The yaks, of course, are very important for them. When they go out into the wild for the yaks to graze, if they get lost in snow and the yak dies, eventually the family will also die. It's kind of like living in the desert with the camels, where if a camel dies, the whole family can die if you are lost in the Sahara. This was one of the most interesting places that we visited, and I talked about Larung, which at the height of about 4,500 meters is considered the world's highest slum. But at that point of time when we visited, with about 10,000 monks who live in these small houses, it was also the world's largest monastery. And we got to meet a wide array of characters. There are Han monks who are resident here. There are Tibetan monks, of course. And you can see this very interesting line, this road which goes. So across this line are the men, across this line are the women. That's how this whole valley kind of works. It has seen many fires over the last few years. There has been some government crackdowns in terms of controlling the number of people. And as I mentioned, as of now, it's not possible to visit this particular monastery and this particular area for foreigners. Nonetheless, it remains a very important center of Tibetan Buddhism. Many Tibetan pilgrims come to this place, and then many Han Buddhist followers also come to this place. And as Ambassador Saran kind of mentioned, is this recent patronage by the Hans from the southeast coast of China, which is much richer than the rest of China, which has really given this boost to Tibetan Buddhism in this part of the world. And that brings in complications, but also interesting implications on how this whole situation will evolve going forward. We also managed to attend a sky burial, which is the practice which Tibetans follow in burying their dead. The dead are usually fed to the vultures, and their bodies are chopped up after that, and then the pieces made smaller for the vultures to consume, somewhat similar to the way the Parsis treat the dead in India as well as in Iran, the Zoroastrians. But in this case, many may find it shocking, but it's actually perhaps the only possible solution in a place where burying the dead is not possible, because the soil is so thin, and at the same time you don't have enough firewood because there are no forests in such a highland. So we were fortunate enough to attend, or unfortunate enough to attend the sky burial. We also explored the land of Gesar. Gesar is the Tibetan hero, and the Epic of Gesar is one of the ancient world's most famous epics, similar as I would say Mahabharata or Ramayana or the Greek epics. The Epic of Gesar happens to be the longest epic, and it is still being written because people are still adding songs, adding stories of heroism to Gesar, and it is a living epic which keeps on growing every time a song is being sung. A very interesting character which we got to know was Zhang Liaoxing, who happened to study Gesar and actually documented all these in a written format, because earlier it was all in an oral version. And a very fascinating story is that he married a Tibetan woman, because in those days, during weddings, the people would sing these stories of Gesar during the wedding night. And one of the suspicions that I have is that he got married to a Tibetan woman only so that he can listen to these songs of Gesar and complete his manuscript that he was working on. So this particular area, Sertar, happens to be arguably the place where Gesar was during his alleged legends. Now, one of the most fascinating areas for us was this area around Danba. These villages, which you can see in the picture, they have been named by several magazines, including National Geographic China, as the most beautiful villages in China. But also they have very interesting history. They were perhaps home to a queendom. Yeah? So they had this hereditary line of queens instead of kings. And they had these very powerful women who ruled everything from commerce to the empire of this particular place. But the women of this particular valley are also known to be the most beautiful. They are famous all over China and Tibet as being the most beautiful women in that part of the world. But they are surrounded by this whole Kham belt, the Kham region. So in Tibet, you have 4 big regions. You have Kham, you have Amdo, you have Yusang and Chamdo. And the Kham in particular are famous for their men. They are famous for their strength, their tall build, their strong physique, their skin tones, and they are, I would say, the most eligible bachelors as they are considered in China, made famous by this novelist called Qi, who sort of created this Tibetan character who became like a fantasy for Chinese women because of that particular novel. So you have this queendom with the most beautiful women surrounded by this larger area of Kham, which has the most handsome and eligible men. And obviously, the Abba therefore also became famous for the number of love triangles or adulteries that happened. And incidentally, we happened to get caught in one such love triangle. 2 of us were not directly involved, but indirectly, we got entangled into this love triangle that was unfolding right in front of our eyes. But we also managed to witness a beauty contest every year. This valley sort of to capitalize on this reputation of being a queendom and this reputation of the beautiful women. They have been organizing this annual beauty contests every year. And we happen to meet not just the contestants, we happen to meet the winners and the past winners, and we got to discuss how this contest has shaped their lives and what are their ambitions, and also how people sort of react to it, because there is also an undertone that China has been creating this image of shiny, happy minorities who are always well-dressed in exotic clothes and always singing and dancing 24/7 if you watch Chinese national television. So there is an other angle to this whole beauty contest as well. And all these were kind of revealed to us during our trip, and we are fortunate enough to go there. I should mention that during this whole trip, as much as I tried to be balanced, we did hear a lot of opinions from Tibetans, from Hans, about their relationship. And the reality is that many of the businesses have now been taken over by the Hans. But we also met very entrepreneurial Hans, very young people who were dancers at the age of 18 who are now running hotels. And they didn't mean any harm. They were just seeing an opportunity and they were out there. And they were very inspiring characters and interesting characters by themselves. And this whole thing was also rubbing on the Tibetans. Now there is a new generation of Tibetans as well, who are becoming entrepreneurs, who are starting their own businesses, who are very vocal about their rights, and who are very determined to change the course going forward. So all these create this complications and this uncertainty, which, as I mentioned in the epilogue, that I hope that it will only turn out for the better instead of what we have seen in some cases in the past. So once again, I would like to thank my publisher, Konark, for bringing out this book, having this faith on me. I believe it's available in many bookstores and other places where you may be interested in getting this. Now, one thing I would like to mention is about the writing process, and I will stop there. This is a region which has not been visited much by scholars, both within China as well as outside of China. And getting research material was one of the most difficult things. And also I was lucky enough to have some book talks for my previous books in some of the bigger cities like Chengdu while we are visiting. And we happened to meet some of the experts who have done some work in this region. So their direct opinion and their insights was very precious for me. I did find some reference materials in libraries in Singapore as well as in China and online as well. But most of the work in the book is dependent on what I heard and what I saw. And for that as well, I must thank all the people that we met and who are so open in sharing out and opening out their lives in front of me. The whole journey as well as the writing process was also a part of self-discovery for me. As tourists, we always begin our first week in the journey as very skeptical people, always concerned that the person may be charging us $2 more or maybe taking us to some strange place and ripping us apart financially. So that kind of tension was always there, even though I have traveled to quite a few places. But as we traveled, we got to this comfort and this faith on complete strangers who we know that we can trust them completely for the safeguard of ourselves and our lives. Yeah? The other interesting thing is the whole cultural awareness. Myself, I have stayed out of country for the last 16 years. I don't consider myself a nationalist. I'm not a religious person. I don't consider any affiliation to any kind of identity as such. And the same thing I would think my wife also thinks about herself. She's not a patriot either. She's not a nationalistic person. And she also believes that all humanity is the same. But there were small issues related to the kind of food that we were getting, related to some habits, which would spark some deep cultural sensitivities within ourselves. And we were fighting sometimes about the quality of food in India and China, the kind of sports achievements that India has had and China has had. So that was a bit of a self-discovery as well, that even though we claim to be citizens of the world who have no affiliations to any identity, there is some thread which is deep inside. And it was good for me to be conscious about that along this process. And it brought in some surprise. At the same time, it made me conscious of myself as a human being as well. So with that, I will stop here. And once again, thanks to my publisher, thanks to everyone who made this book possible. And thanks to all the readers and attendees to this session as well. And the curiosity that you display in any such talk about people who we would consider others is one of the reasons which keeps me going. This whole ability to share about others, about rest of the world, to create a better and a more open world is what really keeps me going in terms of keeping on writing. So with that, I will stop, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shivaji, for that very detailed introduction, and special thanks for those photographs, because in the book we don't really get the feel of the photographs, and it will be wonderful to see all the pictures that you have taken too. I note that you have a website where these photos can be accessed and can be looked at. And I don't know whether the economics will permit it, but perhaps a coffee table at some point of all your travels and the photographs would also be a good idea. I see that in the program which was drawn up, we have the book launch now. Uday, KPR, how do you do a book launch through a Zoom discussion? This is something new to me.
It's totally new to us also, but then we all can hold a copy each of the book and show, and that's all.
Right.
Yeah.
So who I like? I have only a digital copy. Yes, Shivaji has a book. Please hold it up a little higher so that everybody can see it.
Yes, and the Shyamsaran ji must be holding a copy of the book.
Well, I don't know whether I have the copy of the book with me, but anyway, let me give it a clap when it comes up on screen.
Okay, I have one.
Hold up a copy of the cover. Is this right way up? Yes. And an applause, please, gentlemen, ladies.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
So would questions from anyone? Would anyone like to engage Ambassador Shyamsaran or Shivaji in a discussion? While we wait, Shivaji, just to probe you a little more, you didn't mention in your introduction the Chiang minority, which you talk about, which is quite unique, and I had never heard of this white stone religion, which they believe in. Would you like to speak a little more? Tell our participants a little more about the minority and their beliefs?
Sure, and as you know, in any mountainous region where you have these valleys which create these isolated settlements, they tend to have their own cultures and their own religions till they are swept by one big civilization which can spread things like Buddhism, Hinduism, or other religions. So this Chiang are the residents of this valley around Damba, which is the queen, the land of the beauties. And they have a religion which is the ancient religion that they practice, which has multiple gods, like all these poly religions of the past. And the white stones are ones they consider sacred, and they keep this in many important places, both important in terms of directions in which they're kept and in the arrangement in which they are kept. Nonetheless, just as it happened with Bon religion, which was in main Tibet before Buddhism became dominant there, many aspects of the two religions, Bon and Buddhism, sort of became merged over time. And similarly for the Chiang as well, their white stone religion as well as Buddhism had got mixed over the last few hundred years. They are not Tibetans per se. They are kind of considered a mixed race. They are considered a mixed race of Hans and Tibetans. And that's why Tibetans in the past, the older generation of Tibetans don't want their sons to marry Chiang women because they consider themselves a mixed blood and therefore they cannot be trusted, which is one of the very interesting insights I got during this place.
Shivaji, there's a question from Mr. Alok Srivastava. He's asking, when did you start writing this book and visited this place? And also he wants to know the monastery's name. He couldn't get it.
Sorry, what is the second part?
Monastery's name. Monastery's name. Yeah, name of the monastery.
Oh, okay. So yeah, the travel was conducted during 2016-2017, and it took me almost a year to write this whole thing. And then the monastery that I visited is called Larung, which I mentioned there. I visited, of course, many monasteries because all Tibetan towns have a monastery there. And there were many important monasteries. There was the Lithang monastery, which I didn't talk about in this speech, but in the book it's mentioned. Lithang is the place which is associated closely with Dalai Lamas. The 7th Dalai Lama was born in Lithang, and the 6th Dalai Lama, who was born in Arunachal in near Tawang, he actually disappeared in Lithang. He was being captured by the Mongolian invaders at that time, and he was being taken away, and he disappeared, arguably killed by the Mongolian ruler at that place. And the 6th Dalai Lama is very famous, not just in Tibet, but all over China as well, because of his poems. His poems are very much about wine, women, and enjoying life. And that's why his poems are very famous. And he is very loved and famous all over this world, in that part of the world. And he disappeared in Lithang. So Lithang Monastery is also a very important monastery that I visited. But apart from that, of course, Kamding Monastery, Tagong Monastery, all of them are famous as well. Tagong Monastery has the copy of the statue of Jowa. The Jowa statue is the one which is in the Lhasa, the main temple, which was brought by Princess Wenqiang when she brought in Buddhism to Tibet. And when she was bringing the statue, it fell down in Tagong. And that's why a very important monastery was built there. And it's a very important center for Tibetan pilgrimage as well. So there are many monasteries along the way. Garze, one of the places, has the largest Tibetan library for ancient manuscripts, which is just another 200 kilometers away from Serta. So many of these places are well-known centers of Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay, Mr. Das, there is one more question from Akshat. Sir, you mentioned the role of increasing patronage from southern China in the region. Could you elaborate on what are the geopolitical implications of this patronage?
Yes, it's very interesting, and many directions are possible because of that. Much of the temple restoration work or monastery restoration work which has happened in the recent years have been financed either directly by the government of China or by the wealthy Hans from the southeast part of China. In fact, the Tagong Monastery was very much funded by the people from the southeastern part, the Fujian part of China. So, and many of the Tibetans as well have been visiting, the monks have been visiting different parts of China to spread they have been invited to talk and spread. So there is this interlinkages, and there is this sort of security belt built in to ensure the protection of Tibetan culture. One of the great concerns that many Tibetans have had is whether their culture will become very Sinicized, which is very much possible because of the size of the culture which you have there and the velocity with which cultural assets are generated out of this big chunk of population. This whole Sinification of Tibetan culture was a big sort of thing of concern for Tibetans. But this recent, I wouldn't say recent, but maybe the past 2 decades of patronage by the Hans of Tibetan Buddhism has perhaps brought in that security, that sense of security into this whole Tibetan culture. And the other thing is also this admiration for Tibetan culture and sort of exoticizing in a way. So Tibetan songs, Tibetan looks, Tibetan women, Tibetan men are kind of fashionable in the rest of China as well at this point of time. And all these create possibilities for different scenarios for the current geopolitical situation for these parts.
Thank you, Mr. Das. There is one more question from Ranjana Narayan. I have read your book and liked it a lot. You have mentioned incidents where the reference to the Dalai Lama evoked a lot of reverence among the Tibetans. What was the reaction among the Hans to the Dalai Lama?
Okay, that's a that's a very difficult question. Very interestingly, let me give you a bit of a context. This part which we traveled is not a stronghold of the Gelugpa sect, which is the actual sect of the Dalai Lama. Yeah? This part is directly following the Karmapa Lama. Yeah? So in Tibet, you have different sects of Buddhism, and they each have their own directions in that sense. So even though they worship or they pay obeisance more to the Karmapa, they saw Dalai Lama as one of their cultural figures, cultural icons. And that was one which led to a lot of tension as well historically. And today we saw Tibet, the Dalai Lama's pictures hidden behind a curtain or behind a bedsheet in many houses, as well as in monasteries in many of these households, even though they were followers of the Karmapa Lama. And like you have read in the book, and thanks for your very generous comments, I got even parents were requesting their children to touch me because I come from India where Dalai Lama is staying. So that's the kind of reverence and attention I was gathering because of being an Indian and because of Dalai Lama living there. Now, when it comes to the Hans, every person is different, so it will be wrong for me to say about all of Hans. But in general, there's a lot of negative messaging and imagery around Dalai Lama in the Chinese press and Chinese media. Yeah? So, because I have family there and I know a lot of people there in China, there's a lot of negative associations with Dalai Lama, which has been created over the last few years through cultural media and other means. So overall, the perception of Dalai Lama among the Hans is not that great. Yeah, in fact, they have been sort of tutored to understand the certain aspects of Dalai Lama which you wouldn't consider as very noble.
Okay, spot 4, sir. If you want, you have raised your hand. So if you want to ask some questions, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Shivji, that is, you got one customer for your book now. Thank you, Uday Bhaskar, sir, for inviting me, and thank you, Ambassador Rajamony and Ambassador Shyamsaran, as you, I'm his Shishya, as they say in Hindi, for everything and anything to do with foreign policy and strategy. I have one comment and a question. Being in the armed forces, one has always seen China as CCP and nothing more than that. But I have traveled a little bit, mainly in Sichuan and Guangzhou and those areas. And I did feel that, the Beijing culture and the culture in Chengdu or maybe Guangzhou is quite different. People are more fun-loving, people are more, outgoing and, enjoying their hot pot, as they call it. But I did get a sense there that, there has been an effort to sort of keep the Buddhism culture a little bit under the wraps. And guys who were, followers of Buddhism, they don't seem to be doing it openly, or they feel little, disturbed if, somebody asks them, and if they practice Buddhism, then probably, people, they feel that the government will take some action against them. So this is one sense I got. I may be completely wrong because I've only been 3-4 times. You have traveled so much, and both the ambassadors who are here, they know China much better than I do. My question is that, did you get a sense amongst the, the monks, the village city that you went to, is there a little bit of concern about their, culture and religion being sort of compressed down by the CCP, and vice versa? Did you find the Han Chinese who live in Chengdu, in normal walk of life, did you find that they don't see Tibetans as their own, a normal citizen, not the guys who have invested money, etc., etc.? They may be having some good reason. So this is one thing which has been, in my mind for a long time. And since you have been there for a reasonable amount of time, I thought, let me have a check with you. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So if I can go and maybe Ambassador Saran and Ambassador Rajamony, you may also want to add on that. Your perception is right, but things have changed in the last 5-6 years drastically. In fact, there are many articles you will also see in which the Chinese government in particular has become a big promoter of Buddhism, and there are many Buddhist parks. The typical Chinese tourist attraction places have come up with Buddhism, with expensive cable cars and all that, giant Buddha statues which have been set up very recently. So it's very different. In fact, in the last 5 years or so, the government has been very supportive of Buddhism. We in fact visited quite a few Buddhist monasteries, the Cham Buddhist monasteries in Chengdu as well. And it's the interesting part is even in the Tibetan areas, the government has been promoting that. And the very interesting contraption that we saw was kind of a machine which was being installed by the government with government finance. And this machine has these complicated arrangements of all the mantras and the mandalas, which makes it possible for one person to be getting the merit of chanting the Avalokiteshvara mantra 18 million times by just turning once around this machine, because this machine has these different clockwise, anti-clockwise moving mantras, which make it possible to just in one turn get the equivalent merit of chanting the mantra 18 million times. Yeah? So this machine was being sponsored by the government. We saw a lot of monasteries being, the refurbishment of the monasteries being supported by some government funds as well. So things have changed quite a lot. In fact, the opposite concern is that whether at some point of time the government will establish a monopoly on the narrative of Buddhism by promoting it.
I think we lost a bit of the voice. Are you there, Shivaji?
When it's yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, no, we lost your voice briefly, but
okay.
Please. Have you
yeah.
finished?
So regarding the Hans' views towards other Tibetans, I would say they consider themselves as fellow citizens, but there are some biases and there are some prejudices that we have in India as well about different communities that we have in India. So they will consider Tibetans as violent, they will consider them as lazy and not very trustworthy with money and all that. So there were these prejudices, not a consideration that they are not part of China.
Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Shekhar Sinha. I'm a retired Vice Admiral of the Navy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Admiral Sinha, I would be happy to sort of add on to that question about Buddhism, because this is a subject of great interest to me and something I have looked at. I think there are several things that we must understand. First of all, today, China is the largest Buddhist nation in the world. In terms of the number of people who follow Buddhism, it is estimated that they are around 250 to 300 million people. So they are clearly head and shoulders above anybody else. But then the Tibetan Buddhists are a very small component of that. The largest number of people are the Han Chinese who are Buddhists. And when we say they are Buddhists, it is very different from our understanding of religion or being religious. They come from a very different background where religion was completely suppressed. And then freedom given, the monasteries were revived, the temples were revived, freedom was given for them to go to the temples. And that at a time of a spiritual vacuum, there was no Communist Party, there was no ideology, there was rampant materialism all over, inequalities were growing. There was a natural urge of people to go to temples, and people started going to temples in large numbers. The churches got larger number of people, the mosques got larger number of people, but the Buddhists attracted the predominant number of Han Chinese. So Buddhism in China, if you look at the country as a whole, is actually Han Buddhism. But within that, when it comes to the Chinese government's policy post-liberalization, it is very interesting that they have very intelligently targeted the preacher rather than the believer or the follower. The Chinese government exercises control over religion by controlling who becomes a monk, who becomes a priest, who becomes a preacher. They don't restrict people from going to temple, doing whatever they think is their puja, making contributions, supporting the monks or getting blessings from the monks. None of this is restricted. But who can become a monk, who can become a priest, who can become an imam is strictly controlled by an official Chinese Buddhist Association, a Chinese Islamic Association, a Chinese Christian Association, where it is the government which determines and sets standards for people who have to appear for exams, be trained, and also politically checked before they are permitted to become the priest or the preacher in a church. So they realize that it is the preachers who often create trouble, not the ordinary believer, and there are probably lessons in that for a country like India too. Buddhism is very common, but it is a very tacky Buddhism. I've traveled extensively in China, except in Tibet. But one of the most heartbreaking moments I had was when my wife and I went to the Shaolin Monastery, which is associated with Bodhidharma, whom I consider as the greatest Indian to walk in China, to be known in China and across East Asia, the founder of Zen Buddhism, in China known as Chan Buddhism. When I went to the Shaolin Monastery, I asked, both my wife and I said, we would like to sit in some prayers in the monastery. And the head abbot, who owned a 5-star hotel outside the Shaolin Monastery, said, you know, prayers, that is something we do once in a month, maybe once in a few months. Shaolin Monastery is a huge commercial enterprise where people come from all over the world, especially people associated with martial arts and kung fu, because any association with the Shaolin Monastery means they can mint money back home. And this happens in China also. In Shivaji's book, he talks about a yoga teacher from Shanghai, who is also a New Age yoga teacher. So there are a large number of Chinese who are these New Age gurus who like these New Age fads. But it is very different from the kind of religiosity that you often find in India, or even the kind of spirituality. The Tibetans, because of their long association with Dalai Lama, respect him a great deal. And they probably are more religious than the Han Chinese. But amongst the Han Chinese, knowledge and understanding of scriptures or Buddhism or religion is a far cry from anything that we know in India. I don't know, Ambassador Shyamsaran, whether you would agree.
Yeah, I generally agree with what you say. Of course, I haven't been to Tibet recently, but I did have a chance while I was posted in China to travel extensively within Tibet. But you know, there is a huge amount of change which has taken place, and I think China has woken up to the political uses of Buddhism. It is very much used as an instrument of foreign policy, in terms of projecting China as perhaps one of the most important centers of Buddhism today. It is often said that while Buddhism may have originated in India, but India is no longer a Buddhist country in that sense. That it is China which has the most important centers of Buddhism. So there is a very strong political use of Buddhism. The second point that I would like to make is that I also see more recently that there is a effort on the part of the Chinese government to encourage in a somewhat more, of course, controlled manner that Venu spoke about, or to encourage research, for example, in Tibetan scriptures, to also contribute to the collection of Tibetan scripts and scriptures. I was very surprised when I went recently, about a year or so back, to the Norbulinka library in Dharamsala, that they had a set of about 30 volumes in Sanskrit, which were Sanskrit scriptures, which were in fact collected from all over Tibet. Now, I mean, in a sense, this is part of our our legacy as well, because these are a lot of the manuscripts which actually went from India to Tibet. They are lost in India for various reasons, but in fact, a lot of them dating back to something like the 8th century survive today in many of the monasteries in Tibet. So under the aegis of the Chinese government, there has been an effort to collect a lot of these Sanskrit manuscripts. And so, as I said, I mean, about 30 volumes, pretty thick volumes of Sanskrit scriptures from Tibet have been put together by the Chinese. Something like this is simply not known in India. So I think we have to have a little nuanced understanding of how even the Chinese, relationship with Tibet and Tibetan culture has undergone somewhat of a change. It's no longer, oh, this must be suppressed, but there is also a way of, encouraging an affinity by, in fact, giving a certain respect to Tibetan culture. And it is in that context that, the importance of Tawang has been raised to a major issue between India and China, because as Shivaji said, that Tawang is the place where the 6th Dalai Lama was born, and a lot of literature has been produced to show not only this particular aspect of history, but also the fact that that a relationship between Tawang and the Dalai Lama and the Sera monastery, in fact, has been maintained for many years. So there is I think that one should understand that a little more nuanced sort of attitude of the current Chinese government towards Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism. It's not like what it was, even 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Ambassador Venu. It's really added to my sort of understanding quite a bit. Thank you for taking so much time.
Thank you very much. I have been asked to conclude the Q&A and then to go on because we have a few minutes left. Mr. K.P.R. Nair and Uday will still speak.
Venu sir, there is one more question for
I think the voice is lost.
Yeah.
Mitra, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me know when I can come in, and I'll accordingly.
There's one last question from author from Dr. Manimala Roy.
Okay.
She's saying, congratulations, author Shivaji Das, on publication of your book and this unique book launch. In order to find out the nuances of their culture, did you have to learn the local language?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Usually when I travel, I do learn the local language as much as possible. Of course, in a short period of time, you can only do as much justice. I can manage on the streets in China. So I know Mandarin, spoken Mandarin reasonably okay. My written or the ability to read, as I mentioned earlier, is only about 250 characters. But since I was traveling with my wife, who is native Chinese Han, and she is a speaker, native Mandarin speaker. So a lot of the conversations happened through my wife, whoever spoke in Chinese. But this part, most of the people still speak both languages, Tibetan as well as Mandarin. Many had visited to India as well. Many monks or novices, they had visited to India and they did speak English as well. So there were some places where I could speak directly to them. Some even could speak a smattering of Hindi. There were some cooks in some monasteries who could even speak Hindi a little bit because they have been to India. But except for the nomads, there were a few nomads who didn't speak any Mandarin and didn't speak any other language, of course, other than their dialect of Tibetan. So in that case, we had to go, there were some issues because the person who was interlocuting on our behalf, she had worked in a Han Chinese restaurant and she could speak a smattering of Mandarin, and that's how we got through in our conversations with the nomads. But other than that, because of my dear wife, as well as my little bit of understanding and the presence of English speakers in some places, Hindi speakers in some places, that's how I managed to get through.
I would like to add that, when I traveled to Tibet, and this was long ago in 1984, I traveled around Tibet for something like 3 weeks. That was the period when the Chinese government had announced a much more liberal policy with respect to Tibet. And so some of the monasteries which had been destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese government itself was contributing to their repair and maintenance. But that was also a time where a fairly large number of Tibetans who were settled in India, they were also allowed to go back freely to Tibet and also come back to India quite easily without any kind of restriction. So there was a period for about 4 to 5 years, right up to the death of Hu Yaopang, who was really the architect of this policy, that there was a considerable amount of traffic taking place between Tibet and the Tibetan communities in India. In fact, quite a lot of trade as well, because many of the Tibetans in India, as you know, they run these shops selling various kinds of Tibetan artifacts and jewelry and stuff like that. So they were, in fact, engaging in that trade quite freely, and the Chinese government was allowing that. So during that time, when I was traveling through Tibet, in several of the monasteries, in fact, one came across monks who spoke absolutely fluent Hindi. Because they had been in the monasteries in India and spent many years in India. So there were quite a large number of those people in Tibet. Like, for example, if I was walking around in Lhasa, some Tibetan monk would come up to me and start talking in Hindi, because he was, found it strange that an Indian was roaming around in Lhasa. That, I think, has changed. Because now for the Tibetans in India or in Nepal to be able to make that reverse journey to Tibet is much more difficult now. But having said that, as I said, that there is a different, more nuanced policy with regard to the Chinese government's attitude on the promotion of Tibetan culture, of Tibetan language, than was perhaps the case before. Thanks.
Well, if I can conclude this discussion, the Q&A session, just saying that while Shivaji did give us a detailed description and showed us pictures, actually, I think he didn't do justice to his own, the humor in his book, the thoughtful moments, including in the epilogue, where he wonders what is the future. Is Shangri-La going to become like Disneyland? And Ambassador Saran raised the question of the depredations on the environment, which is happening all over, and how much will tourism destroy all the beauty that exists in the world. But at the same time, is there an innate quality within all of us that when we see something immensely beautiful, we just stand in silence and admire it, and will that ultimately be the savior of environment, so to speak? So I conclude once again saying, don't be satisfied with this discussion. Do buy the book, go and read the book. It is fully worth the effort. And with this, I will ask Mr. KPR Nair to say a few words, and then Uday will say the vote of thanks. That is the order.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I?
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening to all. I would like to thank each and every one of you who have taken time out to today's event. As a publisher, the launch of the present book written by Shivaji is an immensely proud moment for me and Konark. The world is going through an unprecedented crisis, and life, as we all know, has changed. We are learning to adapt new ways of living with the help of technology. The Other Shangri-La is our first launch in the pandemic period. With our office working remotely, we had to face several initial hiccups while we were trying to adapt to the new world.
Mr. Nair, we lost you.
Yeah. Hi, Venu, can you hear?
Now you're back.
Yeah, September last week, we are going to launch through the India International Center and SPC and Konark, the book of Ellen.
Mr. Nair, can you hear? We again lost you.
Venu, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Okay,
Can
just
you?
let me know when I can come in. Huh?
Yeah.
No, I didn't finish my talk.
You've been fading out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Please go ahead and finish.
Well, I was saying that this is the first virtual launch we have done. And soon, next month, we will have another book launch under the auspices of India International Center. That is the autobiography of Mr. Nasrat. And I'm very happy that working with Shivaji, though I did not meet him so far personally, has been extremely wonderful. And the commissioning happened through a friend of mine who had introduced me, who is working in Singapore. So that is, I'm grateful to him, and everything went out very well. We are very happy the way the book is receiving attention, and the beautiful review done by Shyamsaran has in fact raised the hope in us all of a sudden. So we are start getting lots of orders in the last 2 days. So that is a very good news for the author and for the publisher.
One can see the publisher is happy.
Yes, yes. In fact, today I got an order for 100 copies.
Wonderful.
So
wonderful.
for a travel book, at present time, it's not a very easy. Because I've been in publishing for the last, 4.5 decades. Now, we have also put out, to cope up with the demand, since he is in Singapore, we are now, already we have a Amazon Kindle edition, which is now available in about 16 countries. A very low price. In fact, this is the price exactly of the Indian price. No markup price at all. Just conversion only. Australian dollar or US dollar or whatever. That is another important news for us. So everything is fine, and we hope to work with Shivaji, publishing his future books as well. And thank you once again for everyone taking time out and supporting us. Uday Bhaskar ji, Venu Rajamony ji, Tarun Basu, and Shyamsaran ji, thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Nair. Uday, last word.
Yeah, it just remains for me to thank everybody. First of all, I hope my audio is okay.
Yes, yes. Please
Hope
go ahead.
everyone can hear me. So initially, at the very outset, let me thank all of you who made this possible, which is, at last count, we had 65 people who had joined in. I'm told now we are at 49. So I want to thank all 65 who joined initially and the 49 who are still with us. I think it's a great tribute to both the author and the book that all of you are here. And some very interesting questions have been raised and patiently answered by Ambassador Shyamsaran, Ambassador Rajamony, and the author. I had a few observations on the book which I shall not make. So please rest assured that I shall not detain any of you. Some very interesting nuances that Shivaji had brought out regarding Buddhism, the Tibetan variant, Han, ethnicity, etc. I found chapter 13 the most, I would say, for me, valuable. I won't go into detail. It addresses some of the issues raised by Shekhar Sinha, my colleague from the Navy. But we will fade out, if I may be permitted, that we saw the images of this region that Shivaji kindly shared with us. But his writing has a certain style. Like Venu said, it's laced with humor, but with deep insights. I'm going to read a few lines and we'll fade out on that. This is from page 162. Shivaji and his wife are in Bame and they are unable to get a taxi to go to Danba. So they have to spend the night in what is called as the Grand Hotel. And I'm reading from here, Shivaji, if you allow me.
Sure.
Begins. We checked into the Grand Hotel. Despite its name, the floor was cracked and its clocks had long stopped bothering to keep time. There were no other guests at the hotel, and most of its rooms were now taken up by the Tibetan family that ran the place. To make the most of these rooms, the parents had also given birth to many children. When showing us our rooms, the daughter-in-law of the family beat the beds hard to drive away all the dust that had gathered from the time of Padma Sambhava, the 8th century Buddhist master from India, also known as Guru Rinpoche. There was nothing to do at Bame, but it was a full moon night. And we killed time by watching the Yala mountain, reflecting its beauty back to the moon. Unquote. Let me stop here. I just thought I would share this with whoever is still there as participants, and once again commend Shivaji Das for this very fine travelogue, and thank, as I said, all of you for making this possible. And with a better luck, we'll meet again. So on that note, I think we close the session now. Venu, Ambassador Shyamsaran, Shivaji, APR, everyone else. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.